Thank you, Joel. Joel, who's behind the scenes helping me manage the technology to this. Believe it or not, it's not that complicated. We're with you live via Instagram, via the app. But this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau, and it's the fifth of an 8-part series on the future of agriculture. And my next guest is Paul Brierley, the director for the Arizona Department of Ag. And I'm just flattered and very excited that you wanted to be part of this. So in this 5-part series, we've been asking what I have labeled all of you futurists, Aggie futurists. And for those of you that have watched any of these, you've seen some interesting insights from some of our Aggie leaders on where they feel the future of Arizona ag is going. So let's get started.
Okay.
And Paul, I'm telling everybody, I know I have a broken crystal ball and I can't really peer into the future, but we're talking about the future. So when it comes to Arizona agriculture in the future, what do you see?
Gosh, so much, and you're right, the crystal ball, nobody has a crystal ball. Farmers are great gamblers is what they are. But no, I'm really excited about the future of Arizona agriculture, and I've had a pretty long career in it. Most of my career has been in agriculture, and 30 plus years in Arizona.
Like myself, you were born into it.
Yeah, I was born into it. Yep, grew up farming with my dad, and so I've seen it from really crossing generations, and I've seen differences, and we can get into that. But first of all, it's such a critical industry. We know it's going to be there. People continue to eat. Some people in the public question, well, why are you farming in the desert? Well, I mean, we're farming here because of the desert, not in spite of the desert. People don't realize this is not a waste of water. This is any place you farm in the desert, you are going to have high yield and high quality. And I can almost guarantee that will be among the highest.
Yeah, keep talking to that. But my question immediately is why high yield and why high quality?
I think, well, a couple of things. I mean, the weather is year round, right? We've got year round growing weather. But the bigger thing is you control all the inputs. So we're not vulnerable with our systems and our irrigation systems. We're not vulnerable to too much rain, certainly.
Right.
We're not vulnerable to too little rain. We irrigate and we put on the water when we need it. We put on the crop protection products when we need them. And it's just that combined with the good weather and you're almost guaranteed a crop and a good crop. And if you're dryland farming in North Dakota, you may have very little rain and you've planted the crop and you got it this high and then it's done, or you may get it ready to harvest and then there's too much rain and you can't harvest it. So I really like to try to have people understand we've got a future here, because when you look at the productivity with water, even this is about the highest place you can do it. So if I had a bathtub of water, I mean, if the Colorado River was a bathtub of water and I was trying to decide where to farm, I'd farm in Arizona. And
I love that.
So, and we can farm almost anything, as long as they'll let us, we can grow almost anything here. So I think there's a great future in Arizona agriculture here, and it's going to be higher value products, and we're really good at the specialty crops and things like that. Some of the commodity crops may be harder to pencil out as water gets more scarce and land gets more valuable, but we're really good at doing the high value crops. And I think you'll see a transition to that. Nutrition and medical benefits through crops. I think those kind of things are where we really excel.
When you say specialty crops, for those that join us and everyone that's joining us live, know that you have a chance to put comments in the comment section. Again, I'm interviewing the director of the Department of Agriculture, Paul Brierley. But for those that are maybe not Aggies, what do you mean by high value specialty crops?
There's a specific definition that USDA has of specialty crops, but it's generally crops that are grown on a smaller scale. They require more attention, more hand labor, more monitoring than what they call the commodity crops like wheat, cotton, corn, soybeans, things like that.
Okay.
So you're talking about the vegetables, the tree nuts, the fruits, things like that.
High value.
Yep.
So what do you consider, again, I'm thinking that now, especially as the director for the Department of Agriculture, you kind of have the catbird seat. You can be up high, you can be looking around, you have to have a big scope on things. In your mind, what is the most pressing issue for us, and especially in the future for Arizona ag?
Well, there's no question it's water right now. I mean, water is just the dominant topic, but a lot plays into that then? How do we deal with water? So really, I mentioned I've had a long career. So a lot of it has been on how do we keep agriculture productive in this climate, right? If we have less water. At the university, I chaired a presidential advisory commission on the future of food and agriculture production in a drying climate. So the things I've done when I was at Farm Bureau, the research we did at the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture, it was all really, when it came down to it, focused on how do you keep agriculture productive and profitable? And we're in a hard climate to do that, right? But Arizona's the place. Arizona's the place that should solve that problem. We have state level initiatives on electric vehicles, chip making, biotech, for health, all these things. We need a state level focus on how to be productive in this arid climate. And more of the world is becoming arid, as and again, everybody eats. So I think Arizona is the place that we need to solve these problems. And so that's what drives me, is how do we keep agriculture part of that equation as the state grows? There's more demands on water. There seems to be less water. So how do we keep agriculture a big part of that equation?
Right. And based on what you said, recognizing the high-end production of some of our crops, and certainly just the productivity of Arizona agriculture in general, and you made reference to electrical vehicles, chip making, and they're kind of statewide, what do we need to do to have that same level of, I don't even know what you call it, but engagement or policy making? Or
so I'm thinking technology.
Okay.
So one of my little detours from agriculture in my life was for technology. I became an electrical engineer, computer scientist. Crazy thing to do, right? But 5 years of my career were in telecommunications research. And so kind of my sweet spot is ag tech.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I meant when I said there's a lot around water. So we've got water limitations. Well, what does that mean? That means we have to figure out how to be as productive as possible with every drop of water. And we got to show that. We got to tell that story. So, but one of the ways to do that is with technology. And a lot of people look and say, well, agriculture, farmers, they don't really like technology. They don't like to use technology. And I say bunk. But technology is hard when you're out in the field.
Right.
You're not talking about a factory where a widget comes every 30 seconds. You know exactly what it is and where it's going to be. You're out in the field and you've got wind, rain, animals coming through, a labor force that's got different levels of training and technical expertise. And
very true.
So technology is difficult to implement, but technology is happening so fast. I mean, the remote sensing, the broadband that supports it, the automation, because water and labor have traditionally, you can go back, and we did this, right? In the Farm Bureau library, you go back and look at the Farm Bureau news from the 50s. It was the same issues, immigration, labor, water. And so those are, bottom line, water and labor are the big issues, but that can be solved with technology, whether it's automation, whether it's remote sensing. Remote sensing gives you the tools to manage things. So I think it's already happening, a rapid integration of technology into agriculture solves our water problem, solves our labor problems.
Okay. So. Well, and it was interesting. Richard Morrison said something similar. I believe it was Richard, and maybe it was Steve Sossaman. The series has been awesome. And we're going to have all of these videos up on YouTube. So you'll get to see Paul's too and his point in technology. But either Steve Sossaman or Richard Morrison said that technology is expensive, but where it can really be exploited is in what you referenced earlier, those high value crops, because our price point for that area is a little bit higher.
That's right. And some of the challenge is having, especially the large companies, the Bayers, the multinational corporations, how do you get them to focus on a specialty crop that maybe has 200,000 acres grown, or even less, 50,000 acres grown, versus a corn crop that has millions and millions of acres.
Right.
I think how you do it is you show this high value. These crops, believe it or not, they have up to $10,000 an acre invested in the crop before they even harvest.
Wow.
And
$10,000 an acre.
Yes.
And if I have a 400, do the math on that. If I have a 400 acre,
it's a lot invested.
It's a lot.
I told you farmers were gamblers.
Yeah, we are. We
They
are.
put that much money into a crop and hope that they hope, number one, that the crop will grow, right? Which in Arizona it does. They hope that they can harvest it at a time when there's a market for it. my family had one experience with lettuce, and we grew this beautiful field of lettuce. I still remember it as a kid. And by the time we went to sell it, the market was so low that it cost more to harvest it, just to harvest it, than the market would pay us. So we dished it out there.
Yeah.
A beautiful crop of lettuce.
And it had to be heartbreaking when you did it. The only consolation to that, and you probably lost money, the consolation is that you were putting some, organic matter back into the soil.
Yeah.
But in the big scheme of things, that's got to be heartbreaking for the farmer. And that happens more than we like to admit.
It does, especially the markets. So when we were kids, the farmer was all about maximizing yield. I'm going to do everything I can, put all the water, all the nitrogen, everything I need to get that maximum yield. And then you go sell it on the market. It's not that way anymore. Now you've got the market established. You've got contracts written. You need to deliver this product, and then you need to grow it and deliver it. So, but the good side of that, and you probably remember, I judged a national young farmer rancher contest one time. That was really encouraging because it showed me that young people can get into agriculture. A lot of these were first generation. They had figured out how to get in and do something. But the other thing is I saw this shift from maximizing yield at all costs to maximizing returns. And maybe that meant you didn't put that last application of nitrogen on because it wasn't going to give you that much of a boost. And I thought that was really encouraging me to see that new generation that's really looking at how do we be the most efficient and profitable, even if it's not maximizing production.
So my question for that, then, your comment is causing me to ask another question. Obviously, are they using programs and spreadsheets to help figure that out?
They are, they have yield curves and you see what happens if you add more nitrogen, and it's just a little bit of gain, or even maybe you start losing. And same with water and all that. So, and when I talk about technology and remote sensing, that's ultimately that doesn't do any good unless unless somehow it helps a farmer do something different than what they were going to do, right? So I call those decision tools. So the decision tools have to get all this input from remote sensing and historical data and everything. But ultimately, they need to look at what's happening right now and tell the farmer, here's how much you need to water. Here's when you should harvest. Here's when, these different things. And so that's really key. And it takes a lot to do that. But one thing that does is it helps generational transition, right? If farmers are so good about carrying around in their head, this is my farm. I know the soils. I know the crops that I can grow. I know how they respond to the types of weather that we're going to have. But you lose that when you transfer generations, and especially if you've got, say, a farmer doesn't have children who want to carry that on. Well, who's going to do that farm?
Right.
So the more you can digitize that and have that, farming will always be an art, but the more you can digitize that and have that knowledge, I think the better off and the more productive that land will be over time.
Such a valuable point that I never considered. So it's kind of a transfer of that domain knowledge in some ways. From our dad's brain. If it's digitized a little bit, then that transition, at least in the production arena, is going to be better.
I think it'll help. Yeah, it'll help you be more efficient today, but it also carries that knowledge forward.
Right.
And one other thing I was going to say is, so convincing, like I started to say about the multinational companies, convincing them to focus on a smaller type of crop where you have the margin that they can afford. If there's return on it, they can afford to invest in that. Well, that can be where those technologies are proven out, and then they can be transferred to larger crops. So, where they at that point maybe can make sense on a smaller ones that have a smaller profit margin. I'm not saying that specialty crops always have a nice profit margin, because they don't. But
But brilliant point. Are you having fun as director for we're live, so he probably has to say that, but my vibe is that you're really enjoying this.
Am I allowed to say I'm having fun? Yeah, I'm so glad I'm here.
Good.
There's a lot that are struggles. There's no question about
Sure.
that. This is a 300 plus person agency. So there's all that goes with that. And
you're always on the phone and in meetings, I'm sure.
A lot of meetings. My calendar, two things that have changed a lot. My calendar is more flexible, shall we say, meaning I commit to something and then I can't do it because something else comes up. And the other is my emails. I was always really good about reading all my emails, and now I triage my emails.
Well, if you have to triage, you have to triage. But one of the things I've learned with the privilege of getting to work with you for so long, Paul, and I just love it that you're in this position. So I say that as a personal point. I've learned, okay, I'm going to send Paul an email, but I'm also going to text you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not quite as on top of it as I
No,
used
but
to be. But I like to say, so half my job is running this 300-person agency.
Mm-hmm.
Half is being on the governor's cabinet and weighing in
Yeah.
on policy and trying to coordinate with other
Mm-hmm.
agencies. And then the other half, which is the third half, if you didn't notice, is working really with sort of on national type issues. There's I hadn't really realized how valuable that would be, but there's an association for everything, right? Including Farm Bureau. There's a National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, so
Cool.
NASDA. And I went to their first meeting, and frankly, I went unprepared because I thought I was going to meet directors from other states, listen to some panels, and that'd be about it. Well, it turns out they're really influential on policy things. And so we had, for example, a breakfast with just the NASDA members with the top brass at the FDA.
Wow.
Talking about food safety and what their response had been like in Yuma to the 2018 E. coli outbreak, which I was in the middle of, and it was their response was horrible, to be honest. And
not from the farmers.
No, the FDA response to that. And so in those 5 years, fast forward from 2018 to 2023, number one, their attitude is different.
Oh, good.
And number two is our agency, the Arizona Department of Agriculture, is in a much different position. So we've gotten statutory changes to where we have jurisdiction to be responding. We've built up a new laboratory where we can do the testing and monitoring. We do a lot of training. We've gotten federal funding to do training of growers and industry players on food safety. And then what was announced at that NASDA meeting was that we were getting funding for a rapid response team. So
wow.
I hope that never happens again, but if it does, it'll be the Arizona Department of Agriculture responding, not looking for who's the bad guy, but understanding the industry and saying, what happened here? How do we mitigate it, and how do we keep it from happening in the future? So I'm really excited. I like to say we're the good kind of regulation. So
the good kind of regulation. Good. That's awesome. So station break again. Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau on Talk to a Farmer Friday. We're doing this in the afternoon because I absolutely wanted to interview this young man. He is just a few years younger than me.
And I always will be.
And you always will be. I wanted to interview him and make sure that he was part of my Aggie Futurist series. So if anybody's watching live and you have any questions for us or just a comment, feel free. And Joel behind the scenes will let us know. So we're at question number 3, and see if I can remember it. I'm still keeping you kind of in that catbird seat as the director for the Arizona Department of Ag. And because of your role, it's kind of the good regulatory role and trying to kind of anticipate things that are moving forward. What counsel do you feel that you can give, especially our producers, because obviously working for Arizona Farm Bureau, I'm a little bit sensitive to our farmers and ranchers. Is there any kind of anticipatory things you might counsel them for, or, continue to be engaged? What's your best
counsel? I guess in this role, again, the agency itself is largely regulatory. I mean, people come and, well, what are you guys doing about water, or what are you doing about this? It's like, well, we don't. We provide licenses and inspections. We make sure that that people are trained and licensed before they can apply pesticides, before they can, there's all these different, before inspectors can go out and do things. And then we make sure that the quality's there on whether it be tomatoes or grapes or dates that are imported, eggs, poultry, dairy, all these foods that are produced here. We make sure that those are safe and that the quality is good. And so that's a lot of what we do. And in that realm, you think about a lot of the regulation, especially around food safety, but around pesticides also, is presence or absence, right? Is it there? Well, that doesn't really work very well when we can now test down to parts per trillion.
Crazy.
So there's pesticide on this, but it's 1 part per trillion. Is that going to matter?
Right.
So we need to move away from absence or presence to understanding, and this takes a lot of science, and it takes because of that, a lot of coordination with the universities and research and stuff. But how much and under what conditions does something become a problem? That's what's really important. I heard an FDA guy do a comparison to race cars. Showed two race cars. And one was industry. He said, "Yeah, industry, you're doing a great job. You're getting better and better and better at food safety and not having problems. Problem is, the regulators, their race car is also moving ahead, and again, detecting down to parts per trillion, being able to correlate a hospital case in Rhode Island with a hospital case in New Mexico and saying, hey, these are related." And so it's like this race between cars, and I personally don't want that to be a conflict type of situation. Right. But and I guess that's my advice to the industry, as much as I realize there's reasons they're worried about it, is work with regulators as much as possible, because we all need to be on the same team and we all need to share information. It's the only way we're really going to be able to ultimately solve these issues. So,
and we're really aiming for the same end goal.
Right.
We want food availability, and then we want it to be healthy and safe for each other. Fascinating point. And it also makes me think of, what was her name, Madam Curry? Was it?
Oh,
Curry?
with the radiation?
Yeah, where she said, the poison is the dose. So if we're regulating down to parts per trillion, and it's not going to impact you and I and our health, then
right.
Right.
So the regulators need to understand how the industry works, and so that's why I say, work with them, communicate with them.
Right.
I don't see ill intent on the behalf of regulators. I do see ignorance in a lot of cases, and that can be remedied. It's communication, it's understanding.
And I'm thinking, because we get frustrated the minute we think of a regulator, but I think if we can, to your point, continue that communication and relationship. I mean, you don't want to get buddy-buddy with them, because they have to come in and they are testing things. But I think we need to respect one another for the value that we both bring from either side of it.
That's right. And then the other side of when I say good regulation is when you produce a product, it needs to be able to be sold in the marketplace, and it needs to be able to have credibility in the marketplace. We provide that. We provide certification that there's no pests on your nursery products. Certification that your food is safety, that there's no weeds in your cottonseed that you're trying to export overseas. So whether
we don't think of it that way that often.
No, but that's part of the good part of regulation is if you want to sell your product and you want it to be either legal or credible or whatever the issue is, and whether that's in Arizona, whether that's across the nation or across the world, which a lot of our agriculture does, by the way, with seeds and different products, you need that certification from a regulating body like us to say this is safe, this is clean, and awesome. So that's something we do with industry, and again, it's a partnership. There needs to be understanding, and it's good for everybody.
So then, based on what you said, if I pretend that the Murphy farm is still the Murphy farm, I'm going to make sure that I do what I need to do as a farmer under the umbrella of the Arizona Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, and of course we have a whole division called Agricultural Consultation and Training, which is not regulatory. And the purpose of that is what you just said, is we want to help Murphy farms be able to properly apply pesticides or properly, treat their soil and runoff and dust and things like that, where there's more and more regulations as we get encroached on by urban populations. How do you comply with those things? Well, instead of just sending an inspector out and slapping your hand or fining you for doing something wrong, we got people who will work with you and say, here's where you're falling a little short, and here's ways that you can rectify that. And oh, by the way, here's some funding sources to help you do that. Those are the kind of things. And that's the area I want to grow the department into, is the term I use is food systems resiliency. So whatever the food system, whether it's organic, conventional, big, small, we need it to be resilient, and there's different ways to do that. But and right now, there's record amounts of funding coming out of the federal government. USDA has, booked this thick of all their different programs, and their push right now is on local food systems, helping the small and medium-sized farmer to be able to have a supply chain, to be able to produce, have a market for it, and so we're helping in Arizona to administer some of those programs. And
good.
And yeah.
And I do recall, just to confirming, since we've used that as the example, even though Murphy Farms no longer exist, is I remember Dad going through the certification program every year, because I think it was every year for the pesticide application.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And he never complained about it.
It's
And oftentimes he'd come home and said, well, I learned something new, or
that's what's supposed to happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's continuing education
Right.
units that are required. Arizona and California are two fairly notable. I don't know that they're only ones, but it's not
Really?
universal. But they require annual continuing education units
didn't realize
and recertification. And so yeah, we do all that too.
I assumed that every farmer across the United States had to renew their pesticide application license every year.
That they may, but the what am I trying? The pest control advisors.
Oh, okay.
They need to be certified.
Okay.
And yeah, so a lot more stringent about applying pesticides and things like that.
But one thing I will tell you is that even though most of the time Dad did not do the application, it was one of his pest control advisors. They did it, but he still went through the certification because he wanted it. So I don't think that's unusual either.
No. Agreed.
So interesting. So 2 more questions. I already kind of get this vibe, but I'm still going to ask you, are you hopeful about the future of agriculture in the state?
I am. I'm hopeful and concerned.
Oh, okay. So
it's
discuss both.
Yeah. Well, we know about the water issue, right? There's a lot more demand for water. Our state's grown incredibly, and there's less water. I mean, there's less water coming down the Colorado. There's less water refilling our aquifers, and so we need it to be sustainable. We're seeing places where groundwater is dropping and wells are going dry, and we can't have that. That's no future for agriculture. So it's challenging, and I'm concerned in that area. But I'm hopeful because of, number one, the new generation of farmers. That in general, farmers are getting older, but we see in Yuma and we see in the small, specialty producers that want to go to the farmers markets or provide special. You mentioned the Sossamans, right? The historical wheat products and things like that. So there's niche markets, and then there's I do kind of see the middle-sized farmer is being squeezed out. You got the large farmers that, by the way, are mostly family farms in Arizona, multi-generation family farms.
They just happen to be large.
Very large, which you pretty much have to do these days to afford the equipment and the technology and things. So they produce the bulk of our food. And that's really thriving as long as we can keep access to water. And I think the way to do that is to use it as efficiently as possible, show the productivity from it. So it's really exciting to me how they produce the crops that they produce. And then, like I say, the enthusiasm of the people entering agriculture, they care about where their food comes from and very special products that they want to make for special markets and regenerative agriculture practices.
Right.
I mean, we have Oatman Farms here in Arizona that is basically putting themselves up to be the laboratory for how to do this. So they don't even pretend to be making a profit, but they're learning the hard lessons that they hope they can convey to other Arizona farmers and say, this is a way that you can be productive with less water and regenerate your soil. And I just took a trip to the UK actually, and they've changed.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was neat. They invited directors of ag over there, and we got to visit with farmers and organizations like the Farm Bureau and then the government people. And one interesting thing is they had changed their farm policies completely from just per acre support to, if you adopt these regenerative ag practices, then you'll be financially rewarded for that, whether it's growing a cover crop or putting in windbreaks or things like that. It'll be an interesting experiment. I mean, we don't have a lot of some of those practices here, and they're incentivizing them there. So it'll be an interesting experiment to see what happens. But all those things, there's just so much interest from different sectors of society, and agriculture can't go away. Yeah, we all eat. So
if we want to live, we can't let it go away.
Yeah. So I am hopeful about the future. It's just, it needs to be handled right, and I've heard it so much I get tired of hearing it, but we have to tell our story, and it's really true. And it's not just telling our story. Part of it, I mean, I'm practically across the street from the legislature, and I'm realizing the impact that the legislature has on us as an agency, on farmers as an industry, and so people need to have their voices heard at the legislature also.
I like that approach to it, though, and I think, again, I've maybe said that more than I need to, but the catbird seat that you now sit in, you are very hopeful, but you have concerns, and we have to be sensitive to those concerns. It's nobody can, to use a overused metaphor, none of us can stick our head in the sand, but and I don't think anybody is, but some of these concerns, like the water, and I'm segueing into our last question. Sometimes there are moments when you feel like it doesn't feel resolvable, but I think as we keep working on it, it can be and it will be. And I love that part of us trying to be collaborative. And the farmers and ranchers are very collaborative. It's been an interesting fall and new year, but farmers and ranchers love to be at the table. We're used to meeting. The Farm Bureau was built around volunteer leaders, and I know this is, a lot of people say that, but I remember it well from you, even when we worked together at the Farm Bureau, when you say, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. So farmers are not afraid to be in these meetings and try to resolve some of these in the moment sometimes. Feeling like it's not resolvable, but I really do think we will. And our past history proves that point. So on water, because we've talked about it a little bit, actually a lot, what's your assessment? What do you see in the future with how we're going to do this thing called ag water and balancing it between industrial ag and residential?
We could talk for 3 hours on water if we wanted to.
On just that topic.
But I'll boil it down to a nutshell, I guess, is this Governor Hobbs, came in and looked at Arizona as a whole water situation and said, we're not going to bury our head in the sand. There's issues.
Right.
There's issues, and we're going to address them. And she started with urban. She said, there's areas of Phoenix that can't keep developing relying on groundwater because the groundwater's not there.
Right.
And that was really the first time that they've been told, no, you can't just get a 100-year assured water supply based on groundwater. So she started with urban, saying you got to live within your means. Awesome. And then the second issue she looked at is certain parts of the state, as I mentioned, do have wells going dry. The aquifers are going down, and she doesn't want that to happen either, because that's not good for our multi-generational farms that have been there and want their. I mean, you and I, we both know really well that what farmers mostly want more than anything is for their kids and their grandkids to have the opportunity to farm. So I really tip my hat to the governor for doing that. And I know it can be perceived different ways, but working with her staff and everything, I will say the target is not agriculture, other than the fact that agriculture uses the bulk of the water, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to be impacted more than others. But I am heartened by the care that they have about understanding what would be the impact on ag. How do we minimize that? How do we allow local control and all these things? So I think we're at a really critical point right now where this issue's been brought to the fore. And so we're not just going to keep pushing it down the road. And there's more data too. So traditionally we've had a lot of data on the active management areas, the groundwater there, not a lot in the rural areas. And we're getting more all the time. And that's showing us where in the state is the most threatened. So in those places that it's most threatened, the question is, what do we do there? And very limited tools right now. Mainly the active management area is the tool that the governor would have to do something, or the Department of Water Resources would have to do something. And virtually 99.9% of the people out there say that's not the tool we want to use. I mean, farmers don't want it. Government doesn't want it. It's not a tool that was meant for that. It's kind of a big one size fits all. So the governor put together a policy council, as you know, put a lot of effort into, well, I was on that council, and our charge was to come up with a regulatory framework that's different than an active management area. There's been differences, of course, we all know with agriculture, and agriculture through Senator Kerr has come up with a plan that has similar objectives, right? We want to be able to locally manage these areas that are threatened. And so what I'm hopeful is, even though there was kind of a falling out of the policy council, is there's now two pieces of paper, proposed legislation.
That have great potential.
They've got great potential, and we just need to get everybody. And it's such a critical time because I'm worried if this doesn't happen, the governor will act, and the only tool she has is the active management area. So I really, really can't drive home hard enough is we all need to get in a room and bring those two pieces of paper together to something that is acceptable to the legislature and the industry, and that the governor will sign, so that there is a new tool.
Right. Good.
That's my biggest fear is that process fails, and then she's left only with that tool.
Only with the AMA, and nobody likes it. Because that was designed for
the urban areas, and a lot
bigger,
of those big areas, and a lot of those areas, by the way, have Central Arizona Project bringing water in.
Right.
Most of our rural areas don't have that.
Yeah.
So it's not the right tool for that. And we have the opportunity now to come up with something different. I don't want to see that squandered.
I know. Well, maybe we got to do some more praying or lighting a candle.
I'm
not trying to get too religious here, So this has been a great interview. Thank you, Paul Brierley. Thank you for being our Arizona Department of Ag director. Thank you for being part of our Futurist series. And for those of us that have been paying attention to it, just know we've got about 3 or 4 others. We're going to wind this up at the end of March. So appreciate those that have been supportive of this. And stay tuned, because our other interviews are going to be as insightful and worth the listen as this one was. Thanks again, everybody. Blessings to you. Take care. Thanks, Paul.
Yep.